Hello everybody. In today's video we will be talking about the highly anticipated Nintendo Switch 2. Most importantly, what Nintendo can learn from all their previous consoles for a successful launch. And we know they can definitely learn a lot. But before we begin, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. I would greatly appreciate it. So let's begin. Nintendo has been around for many decades, and they definitely ruled the 80s. They lagged behind a little bit on the 90s and early 2000s, but skyrocketed once again, in the late 2000s. Very high highs and very low lows. With Nintendo Switch on the way out, will they be able to top arguably the best console of all time? Or will Nintendo Switch 2 be another Wii U flop? Here's what Nintendo can learn from each of their major consoles. NES.
What's it like to play the Nintendo Entertainment System?
Nintendo ruled the 80s, and it was most definitely because of one thing: quality. Before the NES, here in the US, the video game market had crashed mainly due to the shovelware and in many cases unplayable games, just as Atari in their blockbuster flop E.T. However, Nintendo can learn a lot from the revolutionary console. The first generation prioritized quality, ushering in their famous Nintendo seal of quality, ensuring that consumers would always invest in a great and fun product. While Nintendo Switch has a massive library of timeless games, there's a lot of shovelware, not so Nintendo quality, in their eShop. So Nintendo can learn a lot from your past. If you don't, you're bound to repeat it. SNES. Well, the SNES didn't sell as much as its predecessor, short about 10 million units. Not too shabby for a direct sequel. It did two things right that Nintendo should really pay attention to. Number one, this was the first quote-unquote sequel console, and if they got one thing right, was the transition to a new generation. Not only did they portray the reason why someone should need another gaming console. Anyone remember the marketing?
Now you're playing with power, superpower.
But the name itself portrayed what the console was: a beefy Super Nintendo with 16-bit power now. Secondly, the name, Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It's a perfect name. It was easy to understand and not confusing at all, unlike later on in Nintendo's future. Nintendo 64. Look, Nintendo's no stranger to making different hardware or hard to develop architectures. But that's exactly what happened with the N64. It wasn't less powerful compared to the PS1, but its shortcomings really did affect it in the long run. Only selling about 30 million units, which if you're keeping track, Nintendo is far on a downward spiral. What really affected this console was the media.
Boxes full of clothes, CDs no one knows. When I wanted something for my Nintendo 64.
In the time when Sony entered the gaming race, partly due to Nintendo, they used CDs, which not only had higher quality sound and video, but was way more cheaper to reproduce than cartridges, had way more space. Sure, they weren't as fast as cartridges, but they were very cheap to produce. So what can Nintendo learn? Keep up with the times, Nintendo, because it can really bite you in the butt again. You don't have to be the most powerful. And cartridges are working great now, compared to useless discs nowadays. I mean, you have to install the whole game pretty much to your console in order for you to play it today, modern times, right? But giving developers the right tools can go a long way, even when there's a lack of power. Just ask Sony, selling over 100 million units with the lowered power console.
Like a harmless bagel toaster, but inside is a deadly donut.
Nintendo GameCube. Nintendo GameCube is my favorite console of all time. And while they got discs this time around, they were still a bit stubborn and they did it in such a Nintendo way, using mini discs. But that's not where I think Nintendo can learn from. Rather, it's something that Nintendo lacked in their software launch lineup. The lineup was very weak. Don't get me wrong, I love Luigi's Mansion, and today it would be considered a flagship franchise. But back in the day, in its debut day, it wasn't a Mario 64 or a Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. It's a good thing they also had Wave Race, right? I think Nintendo knows that a great launch lineup can make or break a console. So maybe they've learned their lesson. After all, the GameCube sold around 20 million because of the mistake, although it isn't their lowest low just yet. Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy brand was a powerhouse. With the first Game Boy, they prioritized fun over graphics. Taking a game like Super Mario Land with you was a miracle. even if you did have to sacrifice color. Luckily, they fixed that with the Game Boy Color and then the Game Boy Advance. Then you take 16-bit looking games anywhere. If there's anything they can learn from their Game Boy line, is prioritizing fun over power. They're really good at that. After all, what's the point of having a powerful console if the battery only lasts about an hour? The Game Boy Advance had a 10-hour battery life that you could recharge. Nintendo has to find a perfect balance between power and performance. They could learn a lot from the Game Boy. The Nintendo Switch was lacking in power, but even then it packed a punch. It might not have the perfect balance, especially because the chip is pretty old now. But hopefully, with its sequel, we might be able to get the best of all worlds. We can definitely see the direction Nintendo has undoubtedly steered the gaming industry because of Nintendo Switch. Nintendo DS, Nintendo's best-selling console so far. This console was a juggernaut. Absolutely everyone had a Nintendo DS. This console had a reach unlike anything before. The almost perfect balance for hardcore gamers who love Nintendo games and casual gamers who simply wanted to pass some time. I think that the DS had the best combination that attracts both type of gamers, which in the end opened up and introduced gaming to a whole new generation. While games in the platform were more focused on easy to pick up and play, and maybe with not so traditional controllers, with Nintendo Switch they did an amazing job being attractive to the general public but having the same attraction towards hardcore fans, which is why it sold very well. Now we just hope Nintendo can continue this trend with Nintendo Switch 2. Nintendo Wii. Nintendo Wii was another success, mainly due to the easy pick up and play approach. Everyone was playing Wii Sports. But that's it. That's entirely it, because even though it sold great, the game title attach rate was very low. While they kinda alienated their hardcore fan base with the DS, they really left them in the dust with the Wii. They focused too much on the casual gamer, and if there's one thing to know about the casual gamers, is they aren't very loyal. After all, once the iPhone came out, it was goodbye Wii and DS. So Nintendo, do not focus on gimmicks. The Wii was fun for a while, but a gimmick can only sell so much. For Nintendo Switch 2, focus on quality titles that your fan base is sure to buy. Don't focus on casual gamers, focus on the games. Nintendo 3DS. The Nintendo 3DS was basically a sequel to the DS, but higher specs and 3D. Another gimmick which, by the way, I loved. I used it primarily in 3D to this day. Like I said before, a gimmick can only sell so much. There's one thing they can learn from the 3DS aside from another atrocious launch lineup. Deal Diver, anybody? Was the price. When Nintendo 3DS launched, it was a whopping $250 plus tax. That's insane, considering that we launched at the same price. And that is a home console for the whole family compared to a personal portable gaming device. The price hurt them so much that a few months later, they slashed the price. The 3DS sold very well, around 75 million units, regardless of the gimmick, which they even took off entirely in later iterations. But I think it could have sold way more if the launch price and lineup would have been better. Nintendo launched Nintendo Switch 2 at a competitive price. Nintendo Wii U. The Wii U was a great console. It didn't have the greatest power, but it had some of the most amazing games, not to mention that you could play entire games away from the TV. The Wii U had so much potential. What it didn't have was a good name. When Nintendo announced the Wii U and introduced the new controller, not only were people confused onto what it was it a new console? Was there a new controller? The name certainly didn't help at all. Honestly, if it was called the Wii 2, it could have been more successful. Not to mention the horrible marketing. But with a name like that, it was probably doomed from the beginning. So please, Nintendo, don't mess up the name. How about just call it Nintendo Switch 2? Trust me, that's your best bet. Nintendo Switch. When I first saw the trailer for Nintendo Switch 2, my jaw dropped. The message was clear. It was a hybrid console that you can play at home like a traditional console and take absolutely anywhere. The best of both Nintendo worlds. The idea was genius, and the console is fast approaching to be the best-selling console of all time. This success has a lot to do with quality of games, of course, but I think what really kicked it off was the console's marketing. From the beginning, it was clear why you needed one. In the first trailer, it wasn't a bunch of little kids playing, it was adults, young adults, not waving controllers around, but playing video games. Nintendo has a clear view of their demographic, and that certainly helped. Everyone knows what a Switch is. The logo, the branding, the marketing, it's all perfect. You literally hear a snap and you immediately know it's a Nintendo Switch. So if there's one thing that Nintendo could learn from their prequel, it's the Nintendo Switch marketing. Basically, give us a better Nintendo Switch with more power considering the hybrid nature and great games. Keep the branding you already have. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. A simple 2 beside the logo gives more than enough indication that it's a new powerful console, and the games will only accelerate the sales. I know I didn't mention the Virtual Boy, but that's probably for the better. In the end, just don't do anything that console did and you'll be far better. So what do you think? I would love to hear from you. What else can Nintendo learn from the previous consoles? Maybe even from other consoles? Drop your comments and opinions below. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.